Whoever is listening, guys, welcome back. My name is Grayson Mann, and this is the Man with the Plan podcast, your Wednesday morning podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in to our Monday morning podcast. We broke down the NBA playoffs. A wild finish last night in Los Angeles with LeBron and Curry battling it out again. And today we have Larry Williams returning, the most watched episode on the YouTube platform, getting close to 3,000 views, which is crazy. I remember the
Hey,
blow up of when your interview aired on YouTube. It kept going up. Dang. So I want to thank you for coming back, the first recurring guest of the summer and of 2023, if I'm not mistaken. So Larry, welcome to the show, man.
thank you. Glad to be here. You talking NBA, that got me wanting to talk some playoffs, man. I watched zero NBA in general
Mhm.
and zero regular season this past season, but for some reason I decided, you know what? I want to be entertained, so I'm just going to dive in. And I dove in at the beginning of the playoffs and wow, it's amazing. Like I'm just floored at how many amazing things I see on a regular basis in each game. It's just these dudes are different. It's
Yeah,
that,
they
and
certainly go ahead.
last night's game was really feel like the Lakers stole one because Steph usually when he's playing like that, the Warriors are hard to beat. But it kind of feels like his supporting cast is just not there.
Yeah, and the
Uh,
conversation is more about Jordan Poole. I think he went 0 for
yeah,
10 last night or something egregious, especially for what they're paying him. So the defending champs are on the ropes to the team that was picked to finish 13th in the West this year. So
right.
I would love to see, honestly, before we get into the Clemson conversation, do you have a finals pick for the audience? Maybe get
I don't like.
your take out there.
I just have. I don't really enjoy the picking game. Like I don't really pay attention to anybody's picks, and I don't. And then I generally I don't know. I just watch for the enjoyment of it. Um, I have started to like the Lakers for some reason. I found myself the last couple of games. I found myself pulling for them. I don't know why. Um, I guess because LeBron and Anthony Davis are just such monsters. Um, and it's just kind of fascinating to watch how those two, when they decide they're ready to take over, man, they're so hard to stop, even when they're not playing that well as they weren't last night. It's just they're still gonna it's gonna be hard to close out defensive possessions. Um, I'm sorry, it's gonna be hard to get offensive rebounds
Hmm.
against those guys, because they're so good at closing out defensive possessions. And then I don't know, I like Austin Reeves. I don't know, they're just really compelling to me. Although I love the Steph Curry and the Warriors too, but good gosh, then you got the dang Suns and the Nuggets. That game the other night, that reminded me of Duke, Kentucky 92, the epic college basketball game with just going back and forth and haymakers left and right. And the Joker just, wow. That's my favorite player uh,
Hmm.
right now. Just he's an artist more than he is a player. So I don't know who I'd pick. I don't know. Nobody cares what if I made a pick. It wouldn't mean anything because I don't really know what I'm talking about. I'm a novice.
I so
Who's your pick?
so I at the beginning of the playoffs. So this partially I thought, okay, this was before Miami is doing what they're doing right now. I thought that the Bucks and the Celtics were the two best teams in the league. I thought throughout the regular season they proved time and time again to be the most consistent. They had the better players. They had Giannis, Jason Tatum on Boston, Jaylen Brown. I thought they were a foregone conclusion to meet in the Eastern Conference Finals, and then the winner of that series, no matter what happened in the West, just because there's this Lakers team that's creeping around. Denver never we can't trust them in the postseason. The Suns, I felt, didn't have enough time to gel with Durant. How is that going to look? And I don't like Phoenix's depth beyond Booker and Durant, even though those two are superstars in their own right. So I thought, okay, whoever wins the Boston Milwaukee series and the at the end of the Eastern Conference Finals, that will be the NBA champion. And I've been completely wrong because you have Jimmy Butler come in as an 8 seed, take out Milwaukee, and then you have Boston being taken to the depths of this series against a Philadelphia team that's so up and down. They are a mirror of each other because last year Boston did this throughout the entire NBA postseason. So I don't know. I still think that Boston has a chance to get to the NBA Finals, but I think Philadelphia, if they're consistent, they figure it out. They have the right combo of Embiid and Harden. As bad as Harden was in Game 3, they have a shot here to win Game 5 tonight, and we'll see. This podcast over tomorrow morning. We'll see if I'm right. But I hope. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen me come around with the Celtics hat, but I'm hoping. But I don't know if it's gonna
Oh yeah.
happen. And in the West, I like Los Angeles like you do. I think their length, it's like the bubble year. You just can't really get past them. And then when they're playing on their best game offensively, it's tough to stop. And we're seeing that with Golden State right now. So it's like you said, it's fascinating.
Seems like the Celtics, as good as Tatum and Brown are, it just seems like they're missing something. I don't know if it's that typical point guard presence who can really, I don't know, be the facilitator. There's just something there. I don't know if it's the demons. They can't get past this mental hurdle.
Yeah.
But they should have closed out that game on Sunday at Philadelphia. So anyway, I'm looking forward to the rest. I'm captivated. After a big reason I'm diving into this is a similar reason to why I dive into the NFL playoffs the last couple of years. It's because I have time. Like during college football season
Mhm.
on Sundays, I'm working. I'm busy catching up on the previous Saturday's game and writing a lot of stuff, and then trying to catch up on other college football games that I missed while covering the Clemson game. And so it's a lot of fun to during the off season to just sort of gobble up the playoffs, whether it be the NFL or NBA, and to sort of learn to sort of it's all new because I haven't been watching much in the regular season, so it's really cool.
Yeah, and it's not as chalk as it usually is with the NBA. You really it's not like March Madness where there's going to be a guaranteed lower seed that's going to make their Cinderella run like they do every year. We've got a 6 seed and a 7 seed playing in the second round. We got an 8 seed that is a game away from playing in the conference finals. So there's a lot of different ingredients this year that make it captivating for people like you who don't necessarily watch the NBA all the time that can get sucked in for 2 months essentially
Yeah,
and get a really appetizing product, which I've always been a fan of them. And this may be for like maybe the MLB, NHL, they shorten the season, they might get a more appetizing product. But I know that there's bills to be paid, revenue for all these 82 games. But some of those games are just tough to watch because they're not really playing as hard as they do. And if you watched a regular season game in the middle of January and you watched last night's game, it is night and day. And I think
yeah,
that's why a lot of people just wait till April to tune in.
yeah. It's like watching Jimmy Butler or Anthony Davis fully engaged, and playing at the highest level, and it's like there are no frills, no. It's just all about competing, and that's what I
Mhm.
love. It's really what I've loved about the college football playoff. You know, or some of the best teams in college football. Watching them, it's just all business. They're just it's just about really talented, a bunch of really talented athletes competing.
Yeah.
Really doesn't get a whole lot better than that.
And we got you mentioned the playoffs from last year. Man, that we had two great semifinals, and then we had
Yep.
the obvious the stinker in the national championship. But those semifinals were great. I mean, it's always kind of been that pattern. At least when Clemson's been in the playoff, it's been those semifinals are dull. Like they're over by
Yep.
halftime. So you had your Fiesta Bowl with Clemson against Ohio State. You had your Rose Bowl with Georgia and Oklahoma. But last year was the first time I felt we got two really great products in the semifinals, which never happens. So that was really fascinating to see. But anyways, today we're here to we got NBA expert Larry Williams along with the Clemson beat. So we're just gonna backtrack a little bit and we're going to talk about just the spring. And I think for a lot of people, this was one of the more exciting periods of, hey, this is something that a lot of people really need to dive into because of the new hire with Garrett Riley. There's a new quarterback, Cade Klubnik, he finally starting. There's a lot of interesting talent coming in. Peter Woods has captivated a lot of people, but he's not the only one. So there's been a lot of reasons for people to be invested in what's happening with the team this spring. So, in your eyes, what did you see from this Clemson team in the spring?
Probably rejuvenation with the offense in general. And you could tell right off the bat, I guess, just after one or two practices, Cade Klubnik shared a really uh, interesting and fascinating piece of insight when he said something to the effect of, "Yeah, last year we would carry, 80 or so plays into a game." And I think that might be a little much. I don't know if anybody carries that many plays into a game. He said today we just ran the same 15 plays, and so simplifying and sort of freeing the guys up to make plays, and to where they're not so bogged down mentally, I think is it was kind of refreshing. And I think this offense still has some questions, of course. Receiver, I think you know they've taken a major dip the last 2 years. Offensive line, I don't know. And there are even some questions about Cade Klubnik, but big picture, just a year ago we were talking, new sort of identity because you had a new coordinator in Brandon Streeter, but that wasn't the full refresh that was needed. That was more of a continuation of what they had been doing before, and so I think that this brings the refresh that I think everybody agrees was probably needed, and it feels more like Chad Morris's arrival in 2011 because he brings a different voice. He brings a new identity, maybe even like a new brand. Um, I'll say though, and Garrett Riley would probably point out, he doesn't have Sammy Watkins coming in. So that was one thing that really helped Chad Morris because Sammy Watkins was, of course, basically Superman from the moment he stepped foot onto campus.
Yeah, he was special. There's so many. I remember as a kid, we had two jerseys in my house that my brother and I would wear before we watched Clemson games. Was we had a 10 and we had a 2. It was Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins, and we'd in the backyard do the whole thing. But yeah, I think receiver's been a big question, like you point out. But there's also injuries too. I remember that first press conference that you and I took part in with Dabo was, I think my first document of notes was just a page and a half of injuries, and I feel like if the player's not 100%, he usually holds back on the spring just because it's not worth it in his eyes. But that also I think is a blessing and a curse in a way because you have players that get to step up in this time period, and you get to see the potential ones that you didn't get to see last year, or somebody that gets to step up and they've been really working hard in January, February, and then comes March, they step up and the coaches get to notice. Has there been a player that caught your eye, or maybe somebody told you, like, hey, you need to watch for this guy when come spring or come summertime in the fall? He could get some serious playing time. Was there somebody that maybe caught your eye, or maybe caught somebody's eye that you picked up on?
On the offensive side of the ball,
Could be either.
yeah, well, I mean, Peter Woods, I think that's not a secret anymore. The other two are also on the defensive side, Khalil Barnes and Shelton Lewis, just looking really um, advanced for first year guys. I don't know this for a fact, but I would assume that might have played a role in Malcolm Green's decision to transfer. He, ordinarily a guy who's been around that long would be thinking he'd be starting by now, and now not only was he destined to be second string, but also probably contending with Shelton Lewis a bit. a true freshman. And so, um, you know, I, on the other side, Noble Johnson just didn't see enough of him. He certainly got more opportunity as a result of all those receivers being on the shelf, and that was a good thing. But I, I tend to think that all those injuries, there are pluses and minuses to it, of course, but so many of those guys on the shelf, they need the reps, especially with a new offense. Adam Randall, um, Bo Collins, even the offensive linemen, Marcus Tate and Walker Parks. I mean, it's not like those two are finished products. So
Mhm.
um, it's going to be an interesting camp for sure on that side of the ball. Well, on both sides of the ball, but I think this defense is going to be really salty. Um, I think they really have a chip on their shoulder from last year. Just so many, they didn't play as well as they thought they were going to, and they had a lot of extenuating circumstances. Injuries, the Brzee situation with not just the tragedy of losing his sister, but also at the aftermath of that um, with the medical complications that he was really serious stuff he was going
Mhm.
through that really lasted the whole season, honestly. So it just feels like they're in a position to, if they can get some answers at defensive end, um, to really get back to that high level that Clemson defense is known for around here.
Yeah, and I spoke to Barrett and Makuba after the game, after the spring game, and they didn't say it outright, but it felt like to me is, hey, this whole off season, it felt like they came in with a chip on their shoulder this spring game, not because of any resentment towards the offense, but the entire off season the talk's been Garrett Riley, Garrett Riley, Garrett Riley, how's this offense gonna look? And it felt like the defense took a step back in terms of coverage. They were in the shadows, so it felt like they had something to prove, saying, hey, this side of the ball is improving too. We got something to say. And they came out and played really well. I thought the secondary for me was my biggest plus in that game. The way they played against those receivers, they made Klubnik really work and earn those throws. And we had Wiggins with the Makuba with the pick six off of a Wiggins deflection. I think Nate Wiggins is going to be special this year in the ACC in terms of his development from last year. I will say it again, that Wake Forest game could not have been more of a plus for him, being able to just get smacked in the face like that. And it's almost like a wake up call for him because for the rest of the season, his play just continued to rise up. And you can agree or disagree with me on that notion. But what do you, for the defense, how important is it for them to, or like you've said, that there's going to be improvement? Do you think there's a chip on their shoulder coming to this game? I know we didn't really talk about that before, but it's just an idea that popped in my head and something that I've been thinking about for the last couple months.
Yeah, I mean, and you can pick it up in the words and mannerisms of Wes Goodwin. Goodwin he's still in a tough spot. Because the guy he is trying to replace. It wasn't just that Venables was successful. Highly successful. It was also Venables was like a force of nature. He needed a get back coach on the sideline. He said memorable things in interviews. He was one of the most intense figures I've ever been around in a number of ways. And then you have this guy Goodwin, who's in addition to being kind of just a nice guy, just sort of socially, is also kind of he was a behind the scenes guy before, but that's also kind of what he's made to be, almost more like a Bill Belichick type, who's not as comfortable in front of the cameras, who just would prefer to be back in a cave somewhere in the recesses of the football offices, diagnosing tendencies against 12 personnel or whatever. Um, and so last year was it wasn't easy for Wes. He's doing all these things for the first time. Running his own room, running the sideline, calling plays for the first time. I don't care how important and vital he was to the operation before. Doing all those new things and being a leader is going to be a challenge. And he admits it that he was learning on the job in some ways. He told me late last year, he said, he was learning how to be demanding without being demeaning. Um, and then when we spoke with him during the spring, he must have said freaking about 10 times, because he's trying to be a little edgier, I think. Or he's just trying to say that, hey, a lot of the things that happened last year aren't acceptable, getting beaten at the point of attack against Tennessee and Notre Dame and even South Carolina to an extent, not acceptable. Um, that there are a lot of examples of that, I think, that we could cite, but the overall is that, while the defense was good last year, there were a lot of characteristics to that season defensively that we're not used to seeing. It could be Tennessee's tailback just plowing over Jeremiah Trotter. That's one that comes to my mind. It's like, whoa, what? Or it could be the first game of the season when at Georgia Tech, when even though that was a relatively dominant victory, there were instances in the secondary where they sort of didn't hold up at the point of attack and didn't tackle. And Andrew Makuba, um, that was something that was a common theme last year, as he, in his defense, dealt with some injuries, but still was not the physical presence that he needed to be. And so, yeah, chip on the shoulder, you could probably call it that. I don't know if it's because of the offense getting more publicity necessarily, as much as just they want to be better than they were last year. And I also think it comes from some confidence in, hey, this Peter Woods kid is just different than most guys you're ever going to see. And so there's confidence that he's going to be that elite disruptor that Brzee was not able to be consistently just because of all the stuff he dealt with injuries and on down the line. Miles Murphy never really was that presence, I guess for varying reasons. Maybe he just didn't put it all together, even though not too shabby given that he was a first round draft pick. But there's confidence now, I think, that defensive line, they're going to be able to move people around and be a force. And then behind them, you have two of the best inside backers in the country, probably, in Barrett and Jeremiah, and then a secondary that last year was trying to overcome the loss of some important players that now is a lot more experienced, as you said, in mentioning some of the lumps that guys like Wiggins and Toriano Pride took last year, trying to do it for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of like we talked earlier, and this is completely unrelated with the NBA playoffs, a lot of ebbs and flows, a lot of ups and downs, and we'll see if that is a bug in the system or that's an actual feature this year with Clemson's defense. So it'll be exciting, especially with the schedule that they have. They're going to get an early test against Florida State in September, something that I don't think in my lifetime, Larry, not my when I've been watching, because I think I started watching football, Clemson football when I was 9, and I never remember there being a Florida State game 3 or 4 weeks into the season.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
that's
okay, I see.
more
I
no,
thought you were about
yeah.
to say you can't see Florida State being any good.
No, no, I can't say that on here. But the setup for that is interesting, but I think for these like May and June and even after the spring game, a couple weeks after you really get all you can out of that, is there's a certain challenge I feel for just coverage, especially when football is king in this industry, is covering a team that doesn't give you much information other than, yeah, you have recruitment stuff going on here and there, but for you, what is the I don't want to call it a challenge, but what is the direction you take in the summer when there isn't as much content as a beat writer? Like, how creative do you have to get with the stories, the people that you talk to? Is there a certain schedule that you follow differently than opposed to the fall where you just have to look out the window when you have content with football season? For this, how does that work when it's not dry? I don't want to try to use the right worded words
Yeah.
here, but what's the challenge of covering Clemson football when Clemson football is not playing at this point?
Yeah, and can we go back at a certain point? We because the Florida State thing is kind of fascinating, that being
Yeah,
early in the year. And then of course the competition, the schedule this year looks potentially regular season quite a bit more rigorous than it has been in some recent years. But
we can jump to that now if you
um
want to, especially if it's fresh in your mind. You got some thoughts on
well,
it.
yeah, I was going to say what popped into my mind was, you know, the three toughest games, it looks like, Florida State, Notre Dame, and South Carolina, those quarterbacks at all three places. Like that's pretty tough examination for this defense. You know, Jordan Travis just wow. I mean, just what a bear to defend just because he can do anything, you know, with his legs and arm. And then wow, Sam Hartman coming back to Death Valley. That's fascinating. And then of course Rattler in Columbia off the top of my head. Oh, and then Drake May
Yeah, coming UNC.
with North Carolina, and then Brennan Armstrong, who back in 2020 when Virginia came to Death Valley, a game that was a lot dicier than most everybody anticipated coming in, and a lot of it was because of Brennan Armstrong sort of running around freelancing, making plays. He's reunited with the offensive coordinator who was calling the plays that night for Virginia, Robert Anai, who went to Syracuse for a year. Oh, I'm sorry, was it a year? 2 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 years. Um, before taking the job at NC State, and so that's going to be interesting seeing whether the reuniting of those two sort of brings a return to Armstrong sort of playing more freely and sort of that Sandlot type of improvisational football that made him sort of hard to contain back when he was at Virginia. So yeah, is that that's five
Really great.
and good quarter and there could be somebody else that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head. Miami, Van Dyke, I don't know. But that's at their place, you know. So, you
Yeah.
know,
You got, and I'm looking at it right now. You've got from October to it's the stretch of 3 weeks. You have at NC State, Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, and then UNC. You got 3 out of the 4 weeks. You've got I don't want to say you got two quarterbacks in Sam Hartman and Drake May who probably are, and I say Brendan Armstrong too because he's better than a lot of people give him credit for, like you said. Um, three really great quarterbacks that could be playing on Sundays in a
yeah,
couple of years. So Drake May's the two to Caleb Williams one in this upcoming draft, and they're doing these way too early mock drafts, and May's right up there in the top 10. So Clemson, yeah, you like you said, they've got tests, and that early Florida State matchup is fascinating, like you said, because of for me, it's because it's early, so I feel like they're trying to set up something there with the new ACC structure, probably
yeah,
insinuating, hey, these teams probably will see each other again.
yeah,
Let's ensure that.
yeah, for sure. And then there's one. Is it after the Notre Dame game that Clemson goes to NC State?
So it's actually beforehand. So they travel to
NC
Miami on the
State
21st.
before.
NC State's the 28th on the road. That's
So
going to
NC
be,
State is 7 days before Notre Dame comes to Clemson.
yes.
That's not ideal positioning there, you know. But and I think now this would be a good segue or transition back to the question about the off season and the coming up with ideas. You know, you're talking Florida State, you know, being regarded widely as being a step ahead of Clemson right now. You know, just last week I wrote something on that precise topic on all these way too early prognostications, while, do they actually matter to a large degree? No, but perception is a thing, and 150 people in a football building, they pay attention to what people are saying, particularly when people are saying negative things about them. And so, to have Florida, not just Florida State, but Notre Dame as popular items that are ranked ahead of Clemson right now, that's interesting because that has almost never happened, over the last, uh, 7, 8 years. Clemson, I mean, just a year ago, Florida State is coming off of 5-7, and nobody's even hinting at the idea that they could overtake them. Oh, and then, oh, by the way, what happened on the field in Tallahassee? Until Florida State came back late, I mean, Clemson just owned them.
Mhm.
Physically, was physically dominating them. So, anyway, a big part of writing, coming up with ideas during the off season, meaning after the spring game, all the way up to late July when things actually start happening. I think the longer that I do this, the easier it becomes because the better of a planner I am, the better of a note, sort of taking notes on possible things to write about and having like files of ideas, and reading a lot about other teams. For whatever reason, the if I sit down for 20 minutes and I'm reading about some other team elsewhere, invariably something will pop into my head. Oh man, I haven't covered. I could write about this for Clemson. About what's going on here. It's just the power of reading. I think is is really helpful in that the more you read, the more your wheels turn about possible writing topics. But also as you are fully aware, and as you helped us produce the lengthy series that we did on Nick Eason's life story, that can carry a week's worth of content as it did after the recent spring game. And so those are things you don't just wake up the day after the spring game and say, "Oh, I think I want to do a story on Nick. I want to do a 7-part whatever series on Nick Eason's life story." That's something you that sort of comes to mind months earlier. Like, oh, that'd be really cool to maybe see if I could do that, and then you go about trying to see if you can do that, and that means like running it by uh, the sports information director Ross Taylor, and then actually talking to Nick Eason or whoever it is about it, and then actually sitting down with him, which has to fit his schedule, which is very busy, um, and then doing the interview, which lasts, as you know, 3+ hours, um, and then figuring out, okay, how are we going to present this,
Mhm.
and then actually doing the legwork of transcribing the interview, which you did, um, and then presenting it. Once you did that, it's then sort of doctoring it, not doctoring it, but sort of tailoring it to telling a story like a day by day progression. As you know, Coach Easton would bounce around to a lot of different places in what he
Yeah.
was saying about his life, and so it's not like I can. It's not. It has to be readable, and it still has to be good storytelling, And so I'm not saying that I made anything up or anything like that, but it's a lot of moving pieces around and putting similar themes together for this day
Yeah.
and like that. So that's a challenge in itself, but it's very uh, rewarding and fun to be a part of, fun to learn more about these personalities beyond the football field, and particularly personalities that have stories like that. Like I mean, that guy's dealt with the trauma and difficult experiences of 20 different people, not just one person. So and then some years, as I mean, right now I'm thinking about, okay, what am I going to write about? What's going to carry through the late May, the month of June, early July, and I'm sort of always have ideas sort of rolling around in my head. I don't really like countdown type of things like I don't know. It has to be our goal every time every day we wake up. It's to give our subscribers something that they really can't get elsewhere, something good and something they can sink their teeth into. So we don't produce a whole lot of throwaway things. That it has to be something substantive. And so um, I think for several years running, I've done a ranking Clemson's top 25 players on the roster.
Hmm.
And that's always fascinating because it just there's all sorts of arguments for different players in different places. And the important part to me of when we do it is it's not just I'm not just going to sit there and say this is my ranking. I want to talk to people. I want to talk to people with the football team. Hey, what do you think? What do you think about this preliminary ranking? Oh, well, I don't know why you have him there, this guy there. But the really cool thing to me is you get wide a wide array of opinions, even from people who are with the team
Hmm.
about whether one player should be number 3 or number 10. And so it just goes to show even the people who spend 80 hours a week studying these guys, you know, they don't know everything. They don't totally know. It's all there's some guesswork involved in it. So anyway, that's a rambling way of saying that I don't want to just be in a position where because I have to write something every day. And I don't want to be in a position of just during the off season, during the summer, like waking up every morning going, all right, what am I going to write today? Because that can be kind of that can get kind of old. I mean, the more sensible thing is to do a really cool series of articles or something like that
Yeah.
that you can tackle that I can get a lot done, and then during the slower times, theoretically I could spend in the dead of summer I could spend all day Monday working on a week's worth of content, and then I can maybe take some vacation with the family. So anyway, I I really like the rhythms of the year, where you have football season, that 3 or 4 months, and it's intense, and it's every single day of, I don't even know if I would call it work. It's just, following cool storylines, really. Um, and then once you get sort of tired of that, then it switches to the off season. You work on some basketball and things like that. Well, then spring football starts, and then spring football's it's pretty laid back. Everybody's in a pretty good mood. You're a long way from the season, so it's not that pent up, wound tightness that you get during the
Yeah.
season. And then you have the laid back days of spring and summer after the spring game, and then all late July comes, and that's the part that I don't really um, look forward to a ton. Just because this August camp is a pretty big grind. That's our peak season, really,
Yeah.
and it lasts a long time, and I probably don't look forward to it because it comes right after vacation, and so I like vacation. I like being around the family and doing fun things. So anyway, I think this will be my 20th season covering Clemson football. So
There you go.
it hasn't gotten old yet, and it's still just there's always I'm fortunate that there's always something interesting to write about. So, and I guess the big part of that is the people that I'm writing about remain interesting. Dabo and the people he hires, um, it's just there are always different. layers to it that you can explore that are, where you learn something new or you learn more about a particular person in the case of Nick Eason and whatnot.
Yeah, Dabo's never made it boring. That's
No.
for sure. Um, and I think there was a fascinating series that you and Paul are working on. It's about the most consequential recruits of the Dabo Sweeney era, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken. That's been some
Yep.
fun to follow. This is also our unfortunately I'm not sponsored by Tiger Illustrated, I just work for them, but we gotta link it down in the description. Definitely want to subscribe to it, especially if you're subscribed to this podcast. You'll have to get the stream of both stuff. Just wanted to throw that in there for anybody watching. Um, but for this year, I think there's a lot of anticipation and this has been a consistent thing that we've talked about today. There's a lot of anticipation riding on what we're going to see this year. And we talk about the schedule and just how there's a lot of question marks. And we're 1 year away from college football completely changing, as if it didn't change, hasn't changed enough in the last 3 years. Is this year in particular, so Clemson's missed the playoffs for 2 straight years, and they've gone through this DJ Uyunglele cycle, this Brandon Streeter cycle. It feels like a fresh start, almost like a complete reset, if I'm not mistaken. So for Dabo, do you think he thinks this year, okay, I have to make it to the playoffs? We've made the change. We got the new quarterback in Klubnik that everyone seems to believe in. We've got the players on defense. We have the talent and it's all there. Do you feel like this year, if they don't miss the playoffs, there's going to be a lot of, not necessarily, and I'm not suggesting anything drastic with Dabo, but do you think this year for Clemson as a whole of the program, they need to make the playoffs just to say, hey, we made the changes that were necessary and look what happened. We're back. We're the same Clemson that's been for the last decade almost. So, not necessarily saying if they don't make the playoffs this year that all hell will break loose, but how important is it for this team to be in the postseason come December and January?
That's a tough one. There are so many different aspects to that. Is Dabo sitting there saying, "Man, we better make those dang playoffs or else"? I just don't think he thinks that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, uh, he had his sermon on signing day in February, basically telling fans, "Hey, man, ACC championships are still pretty cool, and 10-win seasons are still pretty cool, and I'm the reason." Well, not the reason. He wasn't saying that. He basically saying, "Hey, before I came along,
Yeah.
those things were a pipe dream, and don't take that for granted." I should say, and I did say at the time, fans are probably right to remind Dabo, like, "Hey, um, those full stadiums that you see at Death Valley when you walk off the bus and to the top of the hill before almost every game, don't take that for granted either, because that's something that doesn't happen in many other places. This is still like people still love Clemson football and still appreciate Clemson football, and those full stadiums are a pretty telling and convincing illustration of that. So I do think maybe as he talks about entitled fans, that it's maybe he should specify, like, hey, I'm just talking about 10% of the, maybe a vocal minority or whatever. But be careful, when you're broad brushing an entire fan base that, uh, continues to pay for all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, Clemson's hitting them up for even more now, NIL and all that other stuff. And it's not getting cheaper to keep your parking spot, over in lot one or wherever it is. And so, you know, I'm going on a tangent here, but I'm not, as far as the question goes, but um, in general, I don't think fans' incomes have risen proportionally with the cost of following the team they love and actually being there in person. But yeah, I think especially in the last year of the 14 format, it would be a hell of a statement for Clemson to get back there and to sort of reestablish itself in that upper crust, so to speak, before we transition to a format that's much more diluted and, of course, that contains a lot less specialness with that playoff banner that you hang. I mean, that's just a part of it. It's a part that I don't really like. You know, we'll see. Maybe it'll be a 10 times better system than what we had, but I love the regular season. I love the stakes of it. I love how it just exposes teams that shouldn't be in that playoff, and including Clemson last year, right? Like when I saw the hypothetical, like had a 12-team playoff happen this past season, Clemson would have been a 3 seed,
Yeah.
like because they're conference champion. Like, come on, like I don't know. I have a problem with that. You know, like they were exposed by Notre Dame and South Carolina, and I like the fact. I'm not saying I like the fact that they lost to South Carolina. I'm saying I like the fact that everybody knew, you know, everybody who walked out of Death Valley, nope, not a playoff team, right?
Yeah.
Like unanimous. And that has happened to a ton of other teams out there over the years, and I like that. There have been some arguments here and there. Okay, should this or that team be the fourth team? But I just think the previous system did a fantastic job of what I thought the job was, and that was identifying the national champion. Um, it's a weird topic because, and the topic of Clemson, should they be expected to get back? You know, should they, like, if they don't play for a national title, what's wrong and this and that? I think everybody who's followed this program for the last 2 years has a renewed respect and appreciation for all the things that had to come together for them to go on the run that they did from 15 to 20. Um,
Yeah.
you know, by 19 and 20, it was like, all right, yeah, playoffs, okay, cool, cool. You know, like, whereas in 15, I'll never forget after that Oklahoma game in the Orange Bowl, I wasn't on the field. I decided to position myself in the corridor right outside their locker room, and so I could see everybody who turned the corner coming back into the locker room after the celebration, and the jubilation that you saw, not just from the coaches and players, but from the families of the coaches, other administrators. It was like it's the first time, it's like,
Yeah.
oh my God. It's like we're going to the national freaking championship, and just that euphoria is something that you just,
It's
man,
surreal.
just can't. What?
It was surreal. I
Yeah, yeah. I'll just never forget seeing that on
yeah.
the faces of the people, not just the people that I cover, but the people on the periphery and the fans too. And I
Yeah.
remember at that time, it was like for Alabama fans, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, another playoff, and it was kind of ho hum. But for Clemson, it's like, of course I'm going to Phoenix. I
Yeah.
might never get to another opportunity. That's why so many people went out there. Well, then they go again and again and again, and not that people weren't really celebrating and marinating in the success, but it was more like, oh yeah, we should do this every year. Well, all the stars that aligned and all the pieces that had to come together for that to happen, that doesn't happen a lot. It's not just Deshaun and Trevor. It's also Hunter Renfro and a number of other pieces that weren't 5 stars, that guys who developed into the type of players who were integral to that. And so I think that has to be considered, particularly in light of how much things have changed over the last 2 years with the landscape, um, who the other big dogs are,
Yeah.
like in 19, LSU came out of nowhere, and it was like, okay, that's just like a flash in the pan, because that offense, an otherworldly offense, came together at the right time. Okay, well, Clemson can still be, reign supreme in 2020 in Trevor's last year. Well, then here comes Ohio State, and Alabama didn't fall off the map after missing the playoff in 19. They won it all. with another otherworldly group of offensive
Yeah.
players
Heisman
that
Trophy winner.
year. Yeah, and then here comes Georgia. Like Clemson was fortunate that Georgia was down as long as they were in the previous decade. Clemson is immensely fortunate. Not saying they owe their success to that, but they weren't going to stay down for long. And so now they're a monster. And
Yeah.
it's just hard. And then, oh, by the way, your own conference, in your own state, South Carolina, was down a good portion of that time. Well, it looks like they're on the upswing now. Florida State certainly wasn't going to stay down forever, and now Mike Norvell has that thing, humming. So it getting back to your question, like how do we define expectations relative to the playoff? I really don't know.
Yeah. It's a
I,
loaded
I don't know
question.
how to boil it down to an essence. I just really don't. I think there are lots of unknowns. You know, it could, you know, I do think that Cade Klubnik, 5-star quarterback. Um, he's in that stature, that rare stature of quarterback. I think you know after the DJ um, disappointment, after he just sort of couldn't hold up mentally for that, I think it's reasonable to say, okay, by the end of this year, Cade Klubnik sh- should have shown us, yeah, this is that this is that 5-star kind of uh, sort of transcendent presence at quarterback that we thought he was, even though he doesn't have to necessarily be Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence because that's a really tall order. But then again, you look over at Alabama right now, man, they're having a bit of a reckoning with just how important Bryce Young was and who's going to replace him. We don't know. Georgia, even though their defense has been just otherworldly the last 2 years, I think Stetson Bennett was incredibly important and vital to what they achieved, not just with his arm, but with his legs as well. Carson Beck, not that dual threat type. So we'll see there. Um, I don't know, man. It's hard
Yeah.
to. I mean, this time in 2021, I would not have told you that DJ was going to be a shell of what he was those two games against Boston College and Notre Dame in 2020.
Seems like
It's
forever
just
ago.
hard to. Yeah, a big part of the appeal of college football, I think, is its unpredictability, and so um, I do think it's an important time for Clemson football for sure, because they're in this again going back to that perception. They're not unanimously top five right now. They are with some, they're sort of maybe not top 10, and
Yeah.
so that's a different place to be, and so but they'll have plenty of opportunity against some of those teams that are supposedly ahead of them uh, to make their statement about that.
Yeah. And just to quickly jump back to what you said in the beginning about your experience in Miami, is when Clemson made the national championship for the first time. I was in the eighth grade and we had a Clemson day at
Mhm.
my school because the our head of middle school was she was a Clemson alum. And so she organized this whole thing. We got to wear Clemson jerseys and stuff, and it was just a great time. Even the South Carolina fans were excited, some of them, or just wow, like this is a cool thing. Like Clemson, a team in South Carolina is going to play in the national championship. And as time progressed, I can attest to this myself after the Tampa one. It was kind of the expectation is, man, if we don't make it to the playoffs this year, it's almost a doomed season in a sense. And even going to college, a lot of there was a running joke within my freshman classes. How many of you are here because of the football team? Type of thing because of the amount of people that applied. So when you get to the I think the last two seasons have been eye-opening for a lot of people because of like you said, there's this perspective of all that's happened and all it took to get there. And I don't think you realize it in the moment of the perfect storm that was created. Like you said, you got you almost had everything chalked off, checked off. You had the 50-50 wide receiver, you had the third down reliable guy, you had a running back, Gallman, ETN, who could get between the tackles, get those quick short yardage situations. You had the defense, you had Venables, you had everything come together. And it's like you said, there are teams that'll pop up like this, like LSU, and then quickly back into the shadows with Georgia, who's finally figured it out. So, yeah, I think that,
And
yeah, go
sorry
ahead.
to interrupt.
Go ahead.
And as great as those teams were,
Yeah.
they still had brushes with disaster.
Hmm.
16 probably should have lost to NC State,
Yeah.
lost to Pitt, right? 18, Syracuse. I mean, I'll never forget the feeling at halftime of the 18 game against Syracuse. It felt like the world was falling apart. It's like Eric Dungy and this Syracuse team is going to win this game and maybe win handily, you know?
Yeah. When
And
did Trevor
so
go down with
even the,
concussion in that game?
what's that?
When did Trevor go
That
down
was
in that
shoulder.
game?
It
Was
was
that
it was early. It was in the first quarter. It was a shoulder injury.
because I
Uh,
remember I wasn't at that game. I was originally supposed to go, but I was doing something for, gosh, I don't even remember. But I remember I got a text on my phone saying Trevor's down. And I was like, "What do you mean?" And I didn't have phone service after that, so I had to wait. And someone afterwards called me after I got like service. They said Grayson Chase Bryce just won the football game. I said, "Who?" It was crazy to
that
me.
was yeah. So you know even the best teams, man, they have difficult mental hurdles. To I guess I should say retaining that edge. Um, I think the last 2 years there's been a certainly a reminder. Hey, man, if you don't have that just hard edge all the time, that drive and motivation, then you can slip. But even like even the 16 team, people forget they came into 16 expected to be just tremendous.
Mhm.
After giving Alabama all they could handle in Arizona, but having all that love, and that offense hearing all those great things about it, man, they were scuffling early that season. Troy was, taking pick sixes back, from Deshaun. They were, it wasn't like this well-oiled machine. They had trouble at Auburn in their first game. And so the challenge of that, and Dabo, I think he even brought that up this past season. He says, man, he says that team just wanted to hit the fast forward button to
Yeah.
to Tampa, and it was just hard to keep that fire burning because they knew they were better than everybody else. And so it was just like going through the motions. And so I have eternal respect for those great coaches and great programs, like Nick Saban. That's why he's probably the GOAT. It's because, man, he has just found ways. The hardest thing to do is to overcome human nature, and to stay driven in the immediate aftermath of high achievement. And I don't care whether you're a football team, whether you're Grayson Mann, who just wrote a great article yesterday, or who aced an exam. You wake up the next day feeling, oh, I'm pretty good, like, and so it's just sort of a law of humanity, I guess, is you're
Yeah.
just you let your guard down a little bit, when you're you know when you're looking back at doing something well. Um, so in that respect, I do think I mean, Dabo has definitely sent the message to everybody in that building for the last few months, like, I'm on the warpath, basically, and like, what happened to Brandon Streeter could happen to some of you other guys if this doesn't,
Yeah.
if we don't get back to the desired way of doing things. Now, does that mean Dabo is saying if we don't make the playoff, you guys are gone? I don't think so. I don't think he defines success that way, but I do know that in the past he would always say, we don't list the national championship as one of our goals, But in recent months, he has brought up national championship several times and saying, we can win a national championship with this roster. These freshmen want to win a national championship. That's been interesting to me, that he has used that verbiage, because in the past he has not really included that much in terms of their, you know, what their what their goals are and things like that.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you bring that up because he's always been. I remember the at the end of the South Carolina game last year. One of the first things he said is like, we're not entitled to win every game, and it's kind of flipped. It's been flipped of we're not entitled to win every game to, like you said, he's on the war path. So it should be interesting to see how. And they're starting with CSU or Charleston Southern being the season, so it's not going to be an immediate like, oh man, if they beat Charleston Southern by 60, no one's going to go, oh my gosh, like national championship, book it, because that's kind of the expected outcome. But that Florida State game, like we've said, will be that because it's Old Duke will be an interesting one. They open up with Duke, that's my mistake, but that'll be a fun one too, just to be in Durham for it. But it should be a really interesting and fascinating season that it feels like I said earlier, it feels fresh. It feels like a fresh start almost, even though we're not changing head coaches, but something just feels different. And that's what I took away from the spring when I was there helping you out with the coverage was something feels different. Everyone feels very locked in, like you said, the war path. Like it feels just different. I don't know. It may be just me looking at it differently.
Yeah, I having been around for many seasons, I have probably placed less stock in trying to read the emotions and demeanor of a team, just because of how many times probably I've been wrong, honestly. Um, I don't know. I think, I do believe that the 2 years that DJ was here on the offensive side of the ball, leadership lacking. They just didn't have that, especially in 21. You know, just didn't have those sort of take charge types. Particularly during, um, off season summer workouts and such. I remember the summer of 21. I remember knowing something might this might not be good when I heard, yeah, attendance for on the defensive side for workouts is like 100%. Amazing. Offensive side, not nearly as much,
Mm,
and it's just like not that expectation and demand. And it really sort of carried over to practices when I remember in August of 21, they were just so quiet when they were out there. And I remember Matt Bockhorst kind of flipping out when they were going through a personnel change and some guys didn't get the memo and there just wasn't much talking. And he's like, trying to light a fire under everybody. So I say that to say, when you're out there now, Garrett Riley, man, he is a presence,
yeah,
and his voice it stands out, and so there's no doubt that he's the guy, and I'll be fascinated to see, just how involved Dabo is moving forward. Like, does he still have the play sheet out there? Is he still, you know, talking behind it every play? I'm not saying he was calling all the plays or anything like that. I'm just
yeah.
saying he was involved in the offense, significantly before. And so does this mean he sort of steps away? I tend to think it does. So we'll see. But it's evident so far that Garrett Riley's, um, he is more of a presence out there than his two predecessors, Streeter and Tony Elliott, who were, just more cerebral, more deferential, I guess, to the head coach. And not that that was the wrong approach, but I think in terms of solidarity and the newness that you talked about and getting people energized and galvanized, I think that's probably pretty important at this point in time, to have
Yeah.
that type of presence.
It's interesting you bring up and there's just a couple extra tidbits before we wrap up this. it's interesting that you bring up the Georgia game and the two opposing sides of the offense. One feels disconnected and one feels completely locked in because going into that game, there was a lot of excitement for because I was at Charlotte for the game. And on one camp, you're thinking, okay, we got 2 games of DJ. We've seen it. We know what to expect. And I think someone told me, man, what if the first play of the game, he just chucks it down the field like he did to Powell at Notre Dame? And that was not the case. That was a one side of the ball was absolutely locked in and kept Georgia in check for the entire game. And one side of the ball, it was a miracle when they got a first down, it felt like. And that's also, I think, in part because that was Georgia's national championship defense, the team that went on to go on to win the whole thing. And they were in it. I remember they were driving down the field, having a chance to tie it up. And you're maybe a one throw away with the pick six from potentially going to overtime tied at 3 and have Potter at that distance because they would have started at the I think the 20-25 yard line. So they would have at least had 3 on the board, you'd think. So yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. That's the kind of insight we bring you on for here. So that was actually I did not know that. That's interesting. Wow. But like you said about
Which part are you talking about? You're talking
the
about the offense just being real quiet and all that.
yeah, and the attendance thing because I remember it was someone gave me a comment. They said they just don't look gelled out there. And that was something that they said at halftime. It just looked kind of incomplete, almost like they were starting, they didn't have their head start, or what's the right word? It just looked like they were like a step behind from what they probably should have been to
Well,
start the year.
not to spend a lot of time rehashing that game, but just thinking back, you had Matt Bockhorst had transitioned to center just like 2.5 weeks before. Like, and he's having to go against Jordan Davis, so it's like, come on. Then you had Justin Ross, who had come back, but who had he had gone through COVID early in fall camp. Then he hurt his foot also during camp, I believe. So there was reason for like concern there. Even though that wasn't as a lot of times the stories are bigger and there's more clarity looking back than in the moment.
Yeah.
You had DJ who didn't have a whole lot of confidence. It was just the perfect storm because I think that Georgia defense was just
So good.
you know just frothing to make a statement. And I do think that had there been no Stetson Bennett that year, I don't think they win a championship with JT Daniels.
I agree
Just
with you on
because
that.
JT couldn't move, and Stetson was a point guard almost in some big moments that year, using his legs and just making great plays. But yeah, it was the first sign that, oh boy, this
Yeah.
Clemson offense we're used to seeing ring up a bunch of points. Something's up, something's wrong, and so it even extended into last year, even though they made some significant improvements early. It ended up being sort of the same old. But
Yeah.
the hope, of course, is that a new system and a new presence at full time starting quarterback is gonna lead to uh, maybe a somewhat of a return to what we're used to seeing.
Yeah. And just final thing, you got a head coach pretty much in offense with Garrett Riley is what it feels like to me is that depending on the success of the next couple of years, you could see Riley taking a Power Five job at some point, or who knows? I don't want to speculate or put
Yeah, I think so.
speak for him, but I feel like this is you're gonna get a if this is not a shot at TCU by any stretch, just because they went to the national championship, but 2 years of success, high powered success at Clemson versus if he had stayed at TCU, I feel like the job opportunities might be better, but you can probably maybe I'm stepping too maybe that's too much of a step, and this is I don't know. It just feels like if he does what we think he's going to do here at Clemson, and they make the postseason twice, for example, one with the 4 format, one with the 12, and maybe they get to a national championship. Who knows? There's going to be a Power Five team out there that is going to see that and go, man, we need Garrett Riley to take the reins here at this program. And not saying that couldn't have happened at TCU, but I just felt like Clemson, there was an opportunity there for Garrett to really advance within his career, just as close where Clemson's at.
Yeah, and you talk about expectations here. Think about the expectations for Riley this season had he stayed at TCU without Max Duggan, without Quentin Johnson, and without a number of key pieces. So if they sort of regress back to 7-5 or whatever, and the offense isn't great shakes, then it's
There you go.
anyway. So I think that probably played into it, and also, Dabo has had a pretty good record of producing some head coaches, or at least giving them the opportunities
Yeah.
to take that next step. And so, yeah, I think you know, I think with Brent Venables, you know, it took the perfect opportunity for him to leave. I mean, he turned down the Auburn job the year before. Um, with Riley, it feels more like not that he has the itch to get out of here, but it feels more like this is that sort of closing flourish on his resume, that line, like, okay, to then take the jump. But hell of a coup for Dabo to be able to get him,
Yeah.
um, because a lot of folks out there probably would not have believed that. So it still shows sort of the power of Clemson's reputation out there is still strong, and Dabo as a person, as a leader, is still highly respected, despite a lot of the some of the supposed controversies that you see from the peanut gallery on Twitter, which um,
Twitter is a lovely
nitpicks
place.
everything he says. Yeah.
Always a lovely place. But yeah, so I think that with if you got any final thoughts there you want to add before we wrap up today, this was a fantastic conversation. We pretty much not only did we get your NBA insight, but we got some great tidbits about Clemson football today. So you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, man, this is such a fun conversation that I might have to turn this into my podcast for this week on the website, if that's okay, if I can get your permission.
Oh no, that's fine. The Clemson Dubcast. I do have to plug that. I gotta put that in the description for today
Oh, it's
with
okay. Yeah, no, you don't have to do that. But
oh,
yeah,
we gotta advertise.
I might have to convert this into an audio file and then share it with my subscribers if that's okay with you.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. All right.
No
So this
final
was
thoughts. No. Yeah, you're doing a great job, man. I've told you, but your initiative and wherewithal and industriousness in producing your own podcast and all that. I think it's going to be an asset for you post graduation, and really enhancing your portfolio. But I'm not in any rush for you to graduate. I'm ready for you to help us out some more because you do a good job.
well, I appreciate that. That might have to talk to the academic advisors on that one, but I don't think they'd be. Oh, well, actually, they probably wouldn't mind me paying an extra year of tuition, but we'll see. But guys, that'll do it for episode 120 episodes of the Man with a Plan podcast. Guys, we're trying to get to 20,000 listeners across all of our platforms this summer. That's the goal. And based off of the last time we did the Larry Williams episode, we may reach it. Who knows? But Larry, thanks again for joining us. I'll tag tigerillustrated.com in the description as well as the Clemson Dubcast. Gotta make sure we get those advertisements out there. Check out Larry on Twitter too. Always got some great insight. Guys, thank you so much again. Thanks for all the support in the comments. And as always, guys, have a great day and take care.